What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome to another episode of the Narcissists Code. I'm your favorite self-aware narcissist, Mr. Lee Hammock, better known as Mental Healness, across all social media platforms. If this is your first time seeing my face or hearing my lovely voice, I'm a clinically diagnosed narcissist, and I use my platform on social media to raise awareness for NPD, get more people into therapy, and also validate the victims, survivors, and thrivers of said disorder, said toxic people, said toxic traits. Today's episode, y'all, is going to be about what leads to the downfall of a narcissist. What leads to the downfall of a toxic narcissistic person. Before we hop into today's episode, y'all know I got to shout out my self-love journal, Lee Hammock, I Love Me, a self-love journal, available on Amazon. Helps people rebuild their self-love and authenticity before, during, or after a toxic relationship, y'all. But yeah, let's hop into this thing. So yes. The downfall of a narcissist. And this is just, y'all, this is my podcast. So this is my perspective on it. Other people are going to have differing perspectives and things like that. So before we hop into today, this is a pop quiz. What do you think is the main thing that leads to the downfall of a narcissist? Relationship-wise, career-wise, whatever. What do you think? Put it in the comment section. Think it really quickly. Push pause for 5 seconds. Write it down. Think it. Or you can just keep listening and think it, and just think about it. So to me, the downfall of most narcissistic people, just from my perspective, is the inability to just the inability to be vulnerable, the inability to just put their ego aside, the inability to face shame. I know it sounds like three different things, but there's one big thing, y'all, of avoiding vulnerability, because vulnerability is the ego. Vulnerability is shame. You see what I'm saying? You protect the vulnerable. You're scared to be vulnerable because you don't want your ego to get hurt. Because if your ego get hurt, there's less shame in. You see how there's a cycle right there. So the inability to be vulnerable, to me, is what the main thing is that leads to narcissistic people's downfall. Because vulnerability is not just, being open and talking to other people about your emotions and feelings. Vulnerability is honesty within oneself. The ability to be honest with yourself in certain situations. The ability to just admit, to be able to take criticism. Vulnerability looks different for every single type of person. I know people think vulnerability is just like me being vulnerable to my wife, or you being vulnerable to your husband, to your partner, to your spouse, or whoever you're with. You being vulnerable to your kids and things of that nature, just having those vulnerable conversations, so to speak. But to me, the main thing, like I said, vulnerability, it has so many different, vulnerability is, it doesn't have a shape. It's amorphous. It's one of those things that can continue to shape shift and whatnot for whoever's experiencing it. Because vulnerability, like I said, is the ability to take criticism, because criticism hits the ego. Criticism, constructive, to most narcissists, constructive criticism doesn't exist. Y'all know that, right? To most narcissists and or toxic people, constructive criticism doesn't exist, because it's all criticism. If it's not praise, it's criticism. If you're not praising me, you're downing me. If you're not trying to help me, you're trying to hurt me. If you're not lifting me up, you're pulling me down. It's just black and white thinking, So the inability to open yourself up to hearing a different perspective, to being wrong. Like, y'all, do you hear? So even the ability to admit you're wrong is vulnerability. Vulnerability is a big umbrella, y'all, that covers so many things. Most narcissists lack this, even to some of the self-aware ones, y'all. That's the crazy thing about it. I know people see self-aware narcissists, and you automatically assume that person is vulnerable because they say they self-aware. They have been to therapy. They have been diagnosed. But self-aware does not come. It's not a one size fits all type of thing. There's so many different dynamics that this fits. You see what I'm saying? Self-aware. I can be self-aware narcissist and go to one therapy session. I could be a self-aware narcissist and not go to one therapy session, just get diagnosed by my prison psych. You see what I'm saying? I could be all of that makes me a self-aware narcissist, but it doesn't mean I'm a better narcissist. And some of that doesn't even require vulnerability, because you take the MMPI-2, which is one of the tests that developed to diagnose personality disorders. You go in there and lie on it. You can go in there and try to do anything in your power to not be vulnerable, to lie about how you really feel, to lie about certain things. And they have the damn lie detector built into the test. So they have the deception They can detect deception in the test. So even if you're not vulnerable, you can get diagnosed as a narcissist. The diagnosis does not require vulnerability. Continuing therapy, continuing to put work in and to try to better yourself, that requires vulnerability. The ability to go in and be honest, like, hey, therapist, I cheated on my husband, and this is why. Hey, therapist, I have trouble loving my kids, and this is, can you help me out? Hey, therapist, I have trouble connecting to other people in my life. Hey, therapist, that's right there is vulnerability. Because like I said, you can get diagnosed and go in there and lie about a lot of stuff. Like, that's what I'm just saying. Vulnerability, the inability to be vulnerable keeps so many narcissists, like I said, literally single and hurting and sad as hell. Because that's how it goes. I'm just telling you, the inability to do all of this stuff keeps so many people sad as hell. Because like your wife is about to leave you, or your husband about to leave, and they just want to hear you say a certain set of words, and you know what words that they're looking for, you know what actions that they're looking for, and you still can't do it. They still can't do it. They know what they know what you need to hear to keep you happy. And something inside of them is just like, nope, the ego is so thick. The ego is 10 layers thick. The shame is right there waiting to come in and take them over. And they're just like, no, I will not be vulnerable. I'm not letting the wall down. I'm not letting my vulnerability cloak down. You ever seen Harry Potter, the invisibility cloak? That's the vulnerability cloak. They just throw it on themselves and cloak themselves. And I'm not being vulnerable. I'm not taking my cloak off. You're not going to see. It's just like the invisibility cloak. You're not going to see. When I put this cloak on, you're not going to see me. You know what I mean? When I put this cloak of vulnerability on, you're not going to be able to see me. I'm going to inherently, I'm going to disappear. I'm going to disappear from accountability. I'm going to disappear from being held accountable. I'm going to disappear from so many different things. It's going to make your damn head spin. So that vulnerability cloak is very much like the invisibility cloak that Harry Potter used to wear. So it's just it's very, very similar, But that's a very different space to be in. It's a very unique dynamic to be in, because most narcissists, being realistic with y'all, most narcissists are never going to get to the point where they actually want to be vulnerable, where they see a benefit. There has to be a benefit in the vulnerability. My benefit is literally to keep it's not to keep my family together, because that's a benefit, but also to keep myself together. Me working on myself and being vulnerable in therapy and vulnerable online and stuff like that helps keep my family together, but it also helps keep me together. I feel like that's the most important thing, is keeping me together, which allows me to be a better person, which allows me to keep my family together. It's a circle, it's a cycle right there. Just being in that space and within that dynamic and that peace. So that's why I tell people, y'all, like, if you are dealing with a narcissistic person, y'all, if you're dealing with a narcissist, toxic person, whoever, don't expect vulnerability. Like they might give you brief moments of vulnerability, right? They might give you brief moments of open honesty and be able to take it here and there. But it's the consistency that makes a big difference, y'all. A brief moment of vulnerability is not going to make up for 20, 30 years of a toxic relationship. You know what I mean? There's nothing that's going to make up for the 20 or 30 years of treating you a certain type of way. A brief moment of vulnerability. Oh, here's a brief moment for you. What good does that do you right now? 20 years later, 5 years later, 1 year later, does that make up for any? It doesn't make the pain it doesn't make the pain you've been suffering go away, does it? Nope, it absolutely doesn't. So that's why I tell people, like, you are in a very unique space to be, to keep your stuff together. But if you're dealing with a narcissist, they have to want to be vulnerable. It's not just about therapy and getting help. The vulnerability, it has to be there, because if not, it's going to lead to the downfall. Like I said, not just the relationship downfall. It's going to lead to financial downfall. It's career downfall, raising your kids downfall, relationship with your children downfall, friends and family downfall. It's going to lead to the downfall of so many different aspects of their lives, and they just don't want to do anything about it because they're vulnerable. They don't want to be vulnerable. They don't want to drop their ego. They don't want to drop their guard. They don't want to take any type of criticism. They don't want to be. They don't want to be wrong, for lack of a better word. They don't want to be wrong. Some narcissists just don't want to be wrong, because the wrongness, again, you have to be vulnerable to admit that you were wrong. It goes so deep. And I know people are just like, that one word, vulnerable, it holds a lot of power. Yeah, it does. It holds a tremendous amount of power. It absolutely holds a tremendous amount of power. And that's how it's going to be. That, the ego is so big with narcissists, y'all, they have to be willing to let their ego guard down. To be able to get some help, to be able to treat you better, to be able to be better, they have to be able to let that down. Because if they're not willing to let that down, then this is who you have to deal with, y'all. If they're not willing to be open, honest, and vulnerable, this is who you have to deal with. And this is me being realistic. This is who you have to deal with. I know it sucks to hear that, and I'm telling people, but this leads to the downfall of so many narcissists, just overall in their lives, because they don't want to be vulnerable. Because like, I'll wrap it up with this right here, y'all. As a child, something probably happened to this person when they were a kid. When they were vulnerable, they end up getting hurt. So they shut themselves down. Because that's what happened to me. I got that story is in my playlist, the Self-Aware Sundays playlist, my very first episode. I tried to be vulnerable and I got shut down. And I tried to be vulnerable and I got hurt repeatedly. And I was like, okay, no more. And this is 7 or 8 years old, y'all. Me shutting down based on that. And that's the way that's the way the mind goes sometimes, y'all. Don't say you have to empower yourself. You have to be able to keep moving forward in these situations, because something might have happened to them in their childhood, but it doesn't justify or excuse the way they're treating you as an adult. So don't get slipped up and caught up with that right there, because it happens quite a bit. Where a lot of people thought the narcissistic person might have had a bad childhood, but that doesn't justify how you're living your life right now or how they're treating you right now. Anyway, y'all, thank y'all for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe. You made it this far, y'all. Please help grow the channel, helps reach more people. Like it reached you because somebody else decided to like and comment. You know what I mean? Stay tuned for more. Like and subscribe. Mental Healness is out. Peace. Thanks so much for making it to the end of my video, y'all. If you haven't already, make sure you check out my self-love journal on Amazon. Lee Hammock, I Love Me, a self-love journal. Help you rebuild that self-love and authenticity after a toxic relationship. Thank you.